and the simple thing is that Poplus is the idea is the federation is the organisation, whereas Poplus Components are bits of reusable software. But they have something in common, and that the shared purpose of both the federation and the software is to help people like you in all sorts of different ways. What then are Poplus Components? What exactly are we talking about? To explain them, I'm going to use the analogy of making a meal. Right, so meals are great. I love meals, you can probably tell. We all need them, and people pay a lot of money for them sometimes, and we'll get very angry when they don't turn up. But when we cook meals at home, these days we mainly use ingredients that we've bought in shops, and which we combine together. Sometimes we might well grow a few vegetables ourselves, but these days almost no one would make an egg sandwich by having an entire field full of wheat and a whole field full of chickens and combining them. It's not very hard to explain why it is that people go to supermarkets and they buy ingredients to make their meals out of. But in the world of building websites, especially in this field, we are mostly actually starting from scratch, from that empty field. Thanks to Linux and the big open source languages and frameworks, and the internet, we have a brilliant array of farm equipment. We've got all kinds of plows and tractors and combine harvesters. We've got tons and tons of stuff to help. But actually, each time a project starts, we basically, we're going out into the field and we're growing something from scratch. Poplus Components are actually basically like ingredients. They're like a packet of rice or a box of eggs. On their own, each one really doesn't do a lot. No one wants to eat a plate or a bowl of plain rice. That's not very interesting. But they certainly make cooking dishes with rice a lot easier than wading through your own paddy field. So Poplus Components are like ingredients in that way, but they're also like ingredients because one nice characteristic of cooking ingredients is that they don't constrain you about what you can cook, which is actually quite unlike most software platforms. So today, if I want to reuse a plugin or a module, I like your budget tool or I like your petition tool or something, I normally have to commit to building everything I'm doing, my whole app or website, in the framework that you worked on. It's rare or impossible to use your Drupal module if I don't like Drupal, or your WordPress plugin if I don't like WordPress. But Poplus Components are supposed to be really like ingredients. You can mix them with anything, you're not obliged to put them on top of anything. And I'll return to why I think this is a cool thing for collaboration later on. Anyway, that was all just words and pictures of tractors and silly things like that, and I promised you a demo. And so over the next few minutes, I'm going to show how to mix two ingredients, Poplus Components, to make a pretty simple meal or a pretty simple new website. And this website is going to be about politicians, maybe not surprisingly, but there is a surprise about the nature of these politicians because these politicians are you guys. I've got some great news. It's been an election. All of you, every single one of you has just been elected, and you've been selected as the elected representatives to the Parliament of Poplus. Congratulations. I hope you all rule very wisely. However, if you don't rule wisely, we're going to build a simple site that will allow your citizens to send you messages, find out, to ask you to do things and ask you questions and so on. And just to add a bit of excitement on top of that, just like someone cooking a meal that is on a TV show, we're going to do it live on stage. And of course, nothing ever goes wrong here. So to keep this a very, very simple meal indeed, we're going to use just two Poplus components, two ingredients, and we're not going to use any other code that you might mix it with. We're not actually going to build anything very custom. So this is a very simple meal. It's very much like making cheese on toast, which is just made out of two things. And normally when Poplus components get used, they actually are the minority of a software project. Most of it is written by you and you just use a Poplus component because it solves some boring problem. So in order to build a website that helps citizens send messages to you, the newly elected, we've got to solve two problems. The first, to build a website like that, the first problem we've got to solve is we've got to get a list of who you all are as politicians. And the second is that we've got to make some mechanism for sending you the messages from your voters. And these two components, these Poplus components, are called Poppet and WriteIt. And Poppet is the component that helps you build and maintain a database of politicians, and WriteIt is the component that helps you launch or build sites and apps that involve the functionality of sending messages to politicians. And it's really worth emphasizing here that what you're about to see as I mix these two components to make a website is that they are totally separate things. One of these components, Poppet, was made by my society. WriteIt was made by Ciudadano Inteligente. In different programming languages. They were built in different continents. They were built by people with different first languages. They are separate pieces of code. The only way in which they communicate is over standards and over the internet. But let's get back to the cooking image. Because that helps it. Essentially, if you went to a supermarket, you wouldn't expect the cheese and the bread to be made necessarily by the same people, and that's what we're talking about here today. So we're going to leave the land of the presentation, and we're going to go and take a look at Poppet. So this is Poppet. It exists only to do one thing. It exists to make it easy to create and maintain machine-readable lists of people. All the senators in the country, all the dog catchers in the town, all the judges on the circuit. Sorry. Forgive me, sorry, I saw it on my shadow. But this Poppet instance is empty. It doesn't have any politicians in it. This is literally like what you'd see as you just begin. It's an egg box, but it doesn't have any eggs in it. So what does, because we're not going to get far making a meal with an empty egg box, are we now? At least not a nice one. This is a Poppet instance that is full of eggs, or full of people. You can see, if you squint, that this is a version of Poppet for the Poplus Parliament. You're all in here, the proud representatives of the Parliament of Poplus. I hope you all do your office great dignity. So you're all here, basically. And in fact, if we go and look at the show all, you'll see everybody who is here at the conference is indeed here. So there you are. It's a pretty simple list of all the members of this illustrious establishment. If you were going to make your own version of this, you could either upload from a spreadsheet or you could type them in through the interface. The goal is to make it easy for people without great tech skills to create and maintain data that then is in a format that is really good for people who do have tech skills. That's sort of what's going on here. So let's pick somebody from this list to see, because it's a database, it's basically a public database. So I've got Felipe here, and it's a pretty simple web page with some basic stuff about him. But unfortunately, there's an error in our data. You can see that it says that he's actually a TV chef. And, well, Felipe is just as handsome as many people on television. It's not actually his profession. So I'm just going to hit edit, I'm just going to go in, I'm just going to basically change it to his actual job. Why have I just done that slightly obviously planted thing? It's essentially to show A, that the user interface is pretty simple, and B, to make you realise that if this instance was on the web and live, anyone who ran any other websites or apps that were dependent on this, they would get that piece of corrected information via the API. It would ripple fairly quietly across the internet. So that's a great example of where someone without very technical skills can change a bit of data and it smoothly works with the kind of API ecosystem out there. So there we are. Right, sorry, I lost my place for a second. So Poppet basically is just a simple, sensible place to keep lists of politicians or judges. It doesn't do too much, but everything it does do has been designed to save time and money for people who track politicians or do other things that involve knowing about politicians in some way. It's all about meaning you don't have to engineer this into your own platform. You can save the time that would otherwise involve. But that's just one ingredient. I said we were going to cook a little meal of 2 ingredients. And the second ingredient is WriteIt, which has been built mainly by Ciudadano Inteligente. So this here is WriteIt. So let's see if I can make it a little bigger. See how that works. Okay. WriteIt is another Poplus component. It's completely different, and it's just designed for one thing. It's designed to help people build websites or apps that, amongst other features, include the ability or include a tool so that members of the public, citizens, can send messages to politicians or other powerful people. And in order for WriteIt to work, it needs a list of politicians to work, to power it as sort of as fuel. And you can see in the middle, that's all it's asking for is to say, please give me a link that will describe where the where the list is. And fancy that, amazing coincidence. We go back to pop it here. We go back to the one that's populated. It's actually got a way of copying the link just there in the corner. We press that, it's copied, and now we can go to write it, and we can give it what it wants, which is a link that basically says, over here you'll find. Not only will you find a list of people to run your website, you'll find an up-to-date list, or one that stays up-to-date over time. Now, just before I hit go, do the magic little bit, I should stress that that link there that represents that list of politicians could come from anywhere. This is really important. It can come from anywhere, not just pop it. The data just needs to be in an appropriate format. And this is what we meant earlier when we said that you don't have to commit to using a whole platform, a whole suite of tools to use one component. So, you could, for example, you could get a URL like this off the Sunlight Foundation, pointing to their databases. They don't use Pop-it, but if it was in the same format, you'd be able to do the same thing. You can use Pop-it to supply data to tools that are not Write-it, and you can use Write-it to consume data from things that aren't Pop-it. They are genuinely separate. I'm sorry if I'm hammering there slightly unsubtly. So let's press create, and here's the live demo aspect. We will see, and here we are. Okay, so hooray, phew. So presto, a new, must be said, a new incredibly simple website. Hands up, this is not exactly like something you would probably send to your kind of followers and imagine them to be delighted. But this is a website where we can pick a politician and send them a message. So let's pick Chris, who's sitting over in the front row there. Chris did loads of work to make this work, so he should get some credit. And here's a pretty simple email form, and I'm not going to write an email because that would be the most boring thing to watch in the world. But essentially, it's a proper mailing system. After we press send message down here, it would actually send an email confirmation to make sure I wasn't just abusing it and being spammy. That essentially is sort of the end of the tech demo, because what I want to emphasize is that this website has just basically popped into existence when we took data from Pop-it and we put it into a version of Write-it. Now, I don't want to give the impression that Poplus Components are about making any website anywhere take 5 minutes. That would be madness. So, here, for example, this is a polished website for writing to politicians. It's one that my society happens done. It obviously looks a bit better. It has a bunch of features that make it more useful. But when we first built this took months and months and months. And now I think it's fair to say that if we were going to re-engineer this today, on top of some of the components you've seen and others, we could almost certainly collapse months down to weeks or maybe even days. So in short, you've seen two Poplus components that I hope are interesting and hope explain what Poplus components do. They're little bits of websites that can basically be clipped together to save everybody time and money. And they don't mean connecting to some big, massive platform you don't trust. They're also not limited to the functions you've just seen. There are actually 3 other components already in existence in different stages. They do things like, for example, store lists of what people have said, and they store bills in parliaments and so on. They're in different levels of maturity, but they are all out there. There will be sessions on almost all of these, so if you want to learn about any one of those components, come along. There will also be a very important discussion session led by Tony here, which is going to really be on what defines a component? What's the difference between a component and some other piece of software? We haven't come to an agreement on that, and that's partly because we need you to all input. Is Felipe still here? He's still up there. So while he just comes down the stairs, I want to make one last thing clear, which is that being part of Poplus, being part of the organisation, the federation, doesn't mean committing to using these components that I just showed you. They're just a way of collaborating. They're sort of in England we'd say a start of a 10, but I don't know if that carries. They're a way of working technically together. You can learn about them in the next few days, but really the next 2 days is about you all working out how you want to collaborate, whether it's in something like this or something else. If you want to collaborate in some way that doesn't involve components, you're still very, very, very welcome to be here, because the collaboration is what it's all about. So back over to Felipe, and then we're nearly on to the session.